Hey everybody, this is Perch, and this comic comparison is different from the others, and that's my intent. It's intended to be a different look of things, and just to get in there kind of right away, because I think a number of people will say this comparison's unfair. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people might pick at this particular one. Yeah, intentionally it's a little different from the others. But right now we're undergoing such constant comparisons to Western comics, to manga, and everything else. So I really want to take something that I guess the financial pace of these products are similar in the sense of, the franchise value of Amazing Fantasy number 15, specifically Spider-Man, and My Hero Academia, which of course came out much, much later, and compare some of the differences to them. But please, this will be a good test of who actually watches the video before they compare. These videos are intended to take a look at how these things actually play out and not just jump to reaction. So let's get into it. So obviously, Amazing Fantasy number 15, My Hero Academia, it's 1962 comparing to 2014. And one of the things I want to draw your attention to as we go through this is, a few things, just kind of how storytelling evolves, not just by year, but also by region. We've got something, of course, coming out in Japan. We got something here in the U.S. We have a big block of time difference between the two, over 50 years, basically. And, I also want to throw out one place where this comparison is not fair, and that's of course, when My Hero Academia was originally published in Shonen Jump, in an anthology, just like Amazing Fantasy, actually, it was published differently than how you're going to see it presented here today. So this is apples to almost apples comparison, because we're using the American version, the one that was brought here to the U.S. So you could read it, for one thing. But it does make a couple pieces of difference. I thought this was better, kind of toyed around with showing the original Japanese version, but it lost some of the context. But as we go through this also, look at the build to a hero and in comparison to how these franchises have developed. So obviously, Amazing Fantasy, Stan Lee, the writer, sort of. Steve Ditko, the writer, penciler, and inker. Stan Goldberg, the colorist. For My Hero Academia, we have Hiroshi as the writer and artist. Of course, it is a mangaka kind of studio that I think gets involved and does some of this. So anyway, it is what it is. The original cover price, 12 cents or $1.16 inflation value. Sorry, $1.16 as of 2 weeks ago. Today, that comic's inflation value would be roughly $50. No, I kid. Anyway, the American version was priced at $7.49, and the price does include more material. Now, this price as well is highly variable because it does also come with a lot of pricing discounts. If you went to Target, it was certainly cheaper. So, take it all with a grain of salt. But anyway, as I go through this book and, as you see the pages, they flip by very suddenly. I think there is, people have said, why don't you linger on one page longer than another? Yeah, to avoid getting into too much copyrights issues, this is the way that you're supposed to do it. So we go through rather quickly. Obviously, Amazing Fantasy starting with an ad. That's cool. And also some nice TNA right there off the gate. But what's interesting about these books is they both actually possess the story of how a loser kind of character, in this case Peter Parker for Amazing Spider-Man, Midoriya for My Hero Academia, and kind of how they look at the world around them. Now, in the world of Spider-Man, he, through kind of a fluke accident, gains powers and has to grapple with them. In My Hero Academia, we see a boy who's in a world filled with people with powers, and he has none, and how he reacts to it. The other thing to kind of keep in mind as we're going through this is how quick it all really comes together for this comic. It is pretty amazing that the Amazing Fantasy book goes really, really quickly in all this. Whereas My Hero Academia basically takes a long time to even get remotely close. We have basically three pages, and Spider-Man, Peter Parker, is already climbing up a wall. Whereas, and it just shows you the speed at which some of this stuff goes along and kind of the narration. But by the time we get to kind of 5 pages in, he's wearing a mask and he's wrestling a big guy. The first chapter of all this is done in 6 pages for Spider-Man. Meanwhile, in My Hero Academia, we're getting introduced to the world where these quirks exist everywhere, and kind of that narration happens pretty quickly. But then the story slows down in some pretty significant decompression as Midoriya is looking at a hero versus villain fight and kind of wishing he was part of it and everything else. Got a lot of those vintage ads in the Amazing Fantasy. And so basically, as it goes in, we get the entire finding the Spider-Man suit, Uncle Ben getting shot, Peter Parker realizing that he's to blame and he has that responsibility covering over to him within 14 pages, counting the ads. So really 12 pages, and we've finished the Spider-Man story. Over in My Hero Academia, we're learning more about Midoriya's background, the fact that he has this rivalry going with, Kacchan or Bakugo, who's going to become a rival throughout the entire series. So definitely a different level of storytelling. If you think about the Peter Parker Flash dynamic, you think about the Bakugo Midoriya dynamic. Again, a lot of parallels here, but very, very different ways of telling the story. So page 16, by the way, Amazing Fantasy segues into some of the other stories. And everybody is so fixated on the fact that Amazing Fantasy was the Spider-Man origin story. You forget that we had the Bell Ringer and we had a mummy story and some other stuff going on. But basically, we get a couple other stories. Again, they go by very, very quickly. The Bell Ringer is really 3 pages. And then we're on to the next. So very, very short story, but kind of an interesting little kind of fantasy tale that's going on. Meanwhile, over in My Hero Academia, we're getting more about Bakugo Midoriya's relationship, kind of his reverence for All Might, the greatest hero, and how he grows with that. We get a mummy story in Amazing Fantasy, and again, they're like 4 pages, or 5 pages, and we get kind of a horror mummy story and then some more ads. I left the ads in here for Amazing Fantasy because they are interesting from a comparison. I thought about taking them out, but yeah, they're interesting to see how it all compares. Keeping in mind that in the original publication of Shonen Jump, there were certainly some ads and some other things interfering with this comic. That's why I said it's not completely apples to apples. But if you look at this, we basically have the 4 stories for Amazing Fantasy wrapping up with There Are Martians Among Us, kind of 5-pager, and then a handful of ads. And by the time you get to page 36, Amazing Fantasy has come to a conclusion. 4 stories, 2 chapters of Spider-Man, and then these other 3. And over in My Hero Academia, we see the meeting between Midoriya and All Might, the revelation of All Might's secret identity, and kind of that he's lost his powers to some degree. He can only use his powers for a short amount of time, so it's building up to the ultimate reveal of Midoriya being able to get these powers. So My Hero Academia kind of concludes off with this encounter with a villain that really invokes a lot of splash pages, a lot of just kind of reactions to things. And as you're looking at these pages, again, just contemplate very different ways of telling a story. But in this one, unlike the Spider-Man, Midoriya doesn't have powers, but it's showing his bravery and his heroism to leap into action to try and save someone, even though he is powerless. And the fact that it's just the right thing to do is actually his rival here, Bakugo, somebody who's endlessly taunted and teased him, needs help, and Midoriya has come in to save the day. This prompts All Might to spring into action, even though he is, limited on his power set and has to move very quickly. And this one moment in time is what's going to basically prompt All Might to kind of connect with Midoriya and say, maybe this could be my successor. And Midoriya saying, even though basically I don't have a quirk, but can I still be a hero? And this back and forth. This ultimately would kick off the hero's journey of this character. So we got the hero's journey of Spider-Man, Peter Parker, as it relates to getting these fantastic powers and then the guilt of his uncle's death. Whereas in the Midoriya case, we have this character who wants powers, but also has this selfless nature. And he's set on this hero's journey. So both cases, young heroes kind of taking off, but very different ways of telling that story. Obviously, one other factor here goes without saying. Obviously, My Hero Academia in black and white, whereas Amazing Fantasy had color. So let's kind of, now that you've seen the pages there, kind of some food for thought, which is hopefully what these videos do. But, if we compare the two, 36 pages for Amazing Fantasy, 57 for My Hero Academia in this publication, this version of it. You could also say this Amazing Fantasy had really 12 pages of Spider-Man, because that's what everybody focuses on. So the hero's journey of a new hero, 12 pages back in 1962, 57 pages in 2014. Very different, again, storytelling techniques, both kind of young heroes figuring out who they are. Zero variants for both. Isn't that amazing? That's wonderful. Now, again, if we're being truly fair, Amazing Fantasy has been reprinted many, many times. My Hero Academia also many times. So, both of them have certainly had their reprintings, but a lack of gimmicks to get them there initially. 4 stories in Amazing Fantasy, 1 story in My Hero Academia. Here's the interesting bit, though. So Amazing Fantasy, and this number is definitely open to interpretation. But based on common math, we're talking about a $31.5 billion franchise value. Now, that's merchandise, that's comics, that's the movies. It's basically what Spider-Man built up to over this period of time. Just basically, well, now in 2022, we're talking about 60 years of franchise value built up. Where My Hero Academia is just closing in at 70 million copies worldwide. We had several movies. We're getting really going with the licensing and other things. So we'll talk more about that franchise value in a second, but it starts to make sense why we're comparing these a bit. So, Amazing Fantasy, obviously this title is hugely important, launched a franchise, now worth over $30 billion total. Definitely, Spider-Man cemented himself as one of the key pop culture icons in the world. Now, here's the interesting bit. So My Hero Academia is less than 8 years old. It's closing in on an estimated $5 billion of franchise value. Now, lots of people can quibble over both numbers, but that's a relatively fair comparison. It's very unlikely. So no matter how much you love manga and love My Hero Academia, it's hard to believe that 60 years from now, My Hero Academia is still going to be a massive franchise that will have the same power as Spider-Man. It's possible, but it's very unlikely. I think very few things get to that point. Now, My Hero Academia has spin-offs. It has other things. The creator has definitely signaled that they'd like to keep not necessarily the core story going, but playing with this world, continuing to make money off of it. It's definitely what they'd like to do. But if you look at it from this perspective, My Hero Academia, if it did maintain its popularity like Spider-Man, it would be in a similar territory in terms of total franchise value, which gives a little bit of incentive for this comic. But I wanted to show how these at least the pace of these two are going. It's also fair to say Amazing Fantasy certainly started out a lot slower and then picked up steam as the years went by. My Hero Academia starts out pretty strong in terms of money created and is likely to die off faster, but that's kind of one way to look at these two. Both stories were told in anthology style initially, either through Shonen Jump or Amazing Fantasy. Both grew up to spawn franchises. And as I mentioned during the kind of review of pages, the origin story share a lot of similarities in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. These people new to powers or new to heroism and finding their way, but the storytelling techniques obviously completely different. What's interesting is the origin of a hero is rarely told this way today, and now I'm saying that both the 62 and 2014 version, we don't see heroes introduced like this. Either version, either My Hero Academia or Amazing Fantasy today, the introduction of a hero is usually done significantly different, both in terms of kind of pacing and story. So even though you use different approaches, there are some similarities to how this grew up as a hero and kind of the classic storytelling. What it tells me a little bit is that whether you're in the 60s or in 2014, people like a hero's journey if it's done well. And so the similarities then come into play in an interesting way. All in all, I found this really fascinating to pull together, almost more than some of the others. And we're going to go back to doing some more true comparisons. I mean, looking at kind of versions of the X-Men and how they come across, Batman, others, looking at, like, say, the Greg Capullo version versus the Tom King version of Batman. Just kind of lots of interesting comparisons we can do. But this one was fascinating because you really get to see on full display both where Western comics used to be, because in the 60s, they definitely told stories differently. If you think about the speed of getting to Spider-Man's origin, just 12 pages, versus My Hero Academia and kind of manga style. And I would say My Hero Academia is fairly consistent with other manga in terms of superhero or supernatural stories. They use a similar approach. It's fascinating to see the two side by side, and I thought it was entertaining for me. So I'm hoping it was for you as well. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Curious your takes, and if your take is like I hate manga, it's black and white. I mean, okay, I guess that's a take, but hopefully you have a little bit more complexity to your thoughts than that. Anyway, let me know what you think, and most importantly, thanks for watching.